Hi class, this is Jerry Jankowski again. This will be the second lecture on typography. These are all based on PowerPoint lectures that I've given over the years, updated of course, but they are based on PowerPoint lectures that I've done. I have about 3 or 4 in this series. This particular one is going to be about typeface anatomy and classification. Okay. Now, again, I remind you that I had a lot of problems with typography when I first started in school. Quite frankly, a lot of it just looked alike. What you have to do, the challenge is to start looking at what you think you already know and the differences between fonts, why type, lines of type are spaced the way they are. This is how you're going to acquire a subtlety and a confidence when you do your own typography, when you style it. Okay? So here we go. We're starting out this class on typography by first looking. Remember? Looking. I just didn't look well enough. I didn't have the background. So it's hard to see something if you don't have the background. And that's why I am encouraging you and trying to explain to you to be soft on yourself, be patient, but also work hard at learning this, okay? Not a lot of people really understand typography very well. We have so many fonts to pick from that they just pick a font and that's it. But we're looking at the subtleties of the letter form. So let's forget that a letter or a group of letters represent a sound or has meaning. Let's pretend that these letters are just shapes. All right, shapes. So now let's look at these shapes. Let's look at these parts, okay? Here we go. I'm going to use the word typography as an example because, frankly, it's a good example of a lot of different types of letters. Okay, first of all, ascender, kind of obvious. It's anything that really pokes up. See the H? Okay, the T is not considered an ascender. That's a capital letter. So this is what pokes up. That's the ascender. Okay, in a couple slides you're going to realize, or I'm going to let you know that right here, if you made an X here, or there was an X for a letter, this would be X height. Okay, so you'll see anything that goes above the X height is a ascender, okay? And descender, just the opposite. Anything that's below, all right? So you have your ascender, your descender, and here's that X height I was talking to you about. They use the letter X because the letter X doesn't go above or below, and it's straight on the top and it's straight on the bottom. So that's your X height, all right? That's a good benchmark for judging a lot of your type, spacing, and how it's lined up, okay? Here we go. Talking about baseline lined up. This is your baseline. X height, baseline. Everything sits on the baseline. And you can see I've either I did or something here. The R here is actually up a little bit too high. So that really needs to be adjusted, okay? Bowl. Bowl is the curved stroke that encloses a letter's counter, okay? Lowercase, small form of letters in a type font. You've got uppercase, the T, and then the lowercase. Remember we talked in the last lecture, a lot of the contemporary fonts were based on Roman type that they found carved in marble throughout the Roman Empire in monuments, and it was all in capitals. They had no lowercase. Here is uppercase, also known as capitals or capital letters or caps. And this is a ligature. A ligature is when you form 2 or more letters. It's usually 2 letters together, and you form one glyph. This isn't the biggest thing in the world, but sometimes when you're designing, say, a logo, you can put 2 letters together and it looks beautiful. And it looks beautiful. And it may be slightly hard to read either of them, but then when you take a second look, there they are. Okay? Serifs, very important. And as we discussed in the last lecture on evolution of fonts, nobody quite knows where these guys come from. Some say it was used to carve. They were used at the ends of carving in monuments because the sculptors couldn't stop and do an absolute square. And I find that rather hard to believe. Considering all the monuments, all the sculptures, everything that was written in Rome, just what's left over, you can imagine what was there. I think they knew how to do this. So, serifs, don't know where they're from, but they're very important in typography. The stem basically is kind of what's left over. It's just the vertical, the up and down part of a letter form. Whoops. All right. So here's a recap. We got cap height, X height, baseline, bold, serif, ascender, descender. Look at the beef on the bottom. You got your counter. You can see how that's explained. On the beef, the F, that's called a terminal. That is rarely used. You will rarely hear that in typography. Okay, so let's keep going. Classifying typefaces can be a little confusing. If you really look into the evolution of type and fonts, they talk about terms. They talk using terms called grotesque and Egyptian, and they were using them in a context of the 1800s, 1700s, and they really don't make any sense today. So I refuse to use them. So for the purposes of this class, we're going to only use 5 categories. Serif, sans serif, which we've already discussed. Black letter, which we've discussed in the last lecture on what was first created in when they started printing, the printing press. And ornamental, we haven't talked about yet, and script. All right. Now, serif fonts, these are examples of serif fonts. I actually have them in a sans serif font. That's kind of my bad, but Minion Pro, Garamond, Caslon, Baskerville, Bambo, Saban, Bodoni, and Rockwell. These are very classic fonts. These are serifs. You can't go wrong using these serifs. If you ever use any of these, nobody's going to dare say, oh, you don't know type, because you do. Rockwell's a nice, beefy, heavy font, and it has square serifs. So they don't come to a point, they're like blocky. Sans serif, again, a serif without a font without serifs, and sans in French means without. And here are some other examples. Arial, Helvetica Neue. Frutiger was actually used to create Helvetica Neue out of in Switzerland. Universe, very close also. Myriad Pro, you know that. And good old Helvetica. Helvetica is used everywhere. I might have mentioned in one of my other lectures, that it's basically used in all terminals, international terminals in the world. Can you imagine your font being used in all the international terminals in the world? That's pretty incredible. And I'll explain that later on why. There's a reason for it. Good old black letter, Fraktur, Old English, Rotunda, Textura, and Lucidia. Again, connections with the Middle Ages. This is a copy of how people used to actually write with a quill or a crow quill, actually made out of a feather. That was cut and blunted off. And right now, it's very popular. Oddly enough, for diplomas, it ascribes to a higher level of learnedness. It harkens back to the old days, right? And it's also used for gang tattoos in the United States, so go figure. Okay, here are examples. Diploma, and here are examples of gang tattoos. You will notice it is very difficult to read all If you ever use this, and I'm not quite sure why you would, I'm certainly not encouraging you, but if there ever is a reason to use it, use upper or lower, because other than that, it's very difficult to read. Ornamental, exactly as it sounds, it is ornamental. It's fun, it's decorative, it's trying to look like, oh, some old advertising from the Victorian era stencil that you would actually do a stencil on a box. This is definitely overused. Watch out for these fonts that are overused, guys. Chalkboard, Bauhaus. There's a lot. This is actually not represented well. There actually are some ornamental fonts that are quite nice. And here's some examples. The one on the left is from, I would guess, the 1800s, and beautiful gold gilding on it. The one on the right actually is contemporary. Well, 2012 at least contemporary, a few years off, but this is basically new. It is riffing off of Victorian design, okay? I see there's little marijuana leaves there. I'm not quite sure what this is for. Small press export, Expo, Forbidden Planet presents. I have no idea. I guess you'd have to check into that. Okay, script. Script is exactly what it sounds like. It's imitating handwriting or calligraphy. Script used to be the most hated family of fonts there were. Now, I never use scripts. I always thought they were stupid. The only time you'd see them would be on wedding invitations. Now there are incredible scripts. Just beautiful. I love all of these. Lobster is one of the most famous and most used and overused script font. Okay? So that is a quick lecture on everything from the parts of typography that I will use when I'm talking, when I'm speaking, giving a lecture, or speaking to you. So when I say ascender, you know what I'm talking about. This really is important, guys. And then also the different categories of type, okay? Your 5 basic ones. And that is it.